in pastoral ministry, and I'm rediscovering it all over again, that if you don't keep the right rhythms in life, if you don't take time to set your backpack down every now and then, like weekly on that day of Sabbath, if you don't take those times to set the weights of ministry down, it will consume you and it will crush you. And so if you're here today and you feel a little bit crushed, you feel a little bit weary, you're not ever turning it off, would you just set the backpack down today? Would you set the backpack down? The whole day is focused on scent, on living scent. That's where we're going at District Advance this year. You sneak peek. When I was in the Army National Guard, combat engineer, and then an M1 tanker. And I was in the late 80s, early 90s, and we were fearing the Soviet invasion. My brother actually he was stationed to go in Alaska, so when they came down, then he would be the road bump, the speed bump for that area, and we were going to go somewhere else. And I still remember they crafted this thing called the Airland Battle Doctrine. The Airland Battle Doctrine was the way we were going to fight the latest war, the Cold War, the new war. Because the World War II had always been, it was static. World War I, there was trench. Yes, in World War II, the Blitzkrieg started to come out. It started to change the face of how battles were waged. But they knew it was going to be total chaos in the next war. If there was a world war, it was going to be total chaos. There was going to be no front line. They were going to be behind you. You were not going to have communication. You were not going to be you were going to be isolated. There was going to be a lot smaller units because you couldn't mass people. And they were preparing us for that war. The Airland Battle Doctrine got created by a guy named Boyd. He was an aircraft. He was actually a fighter pilot in Vietnam. And he actually studied how to win dogfights. And he learned that it's all about agility and about conserving energy. Those are the two keys. It's not about speed as much as you might think. It's about agility, and it's about conserving energy. And so he put that equation to work, created the F-15 fighter out of that. And some of the advanced fighters that we have today, they were trying to get bigger. And no, we got to be agile. And we got to be able to move the energy around. And he applied that to the art of war. And so out of that came the Airland Battle Doctrine. And part of that, they really emphasized this thing called the 5-paragraph operation order. Anybody building the military, you know what that is. The third paragraph, guess what it was? Commander's intent. Commander's intent. The idea was, in this war, you can't give people a 10-list thing to do. Go to A and then B and then C and then D. You could do that in the previous wars when it was more static and slow moving. You could sort of chart the chess moves ahead of time. But you couldn't do that in this war. And so they created this thing called Commander's Intent, where you conveyed the outcome that you wanted to see. And you gave initiative to the commander on the field, because what he was facing in this moment wasn't going to be the same when it really came down. 5 minutes in, it was going to be totally different. You know what I've discovered about commander's intent? And that idea, that concept, it applies for how we lead in the church today. But it doesn't have a greater application. I believe that there was an intent that Jesus gave us to the church, a commander's intent that gives initiative to us, creative imagination, to love our communities and our neighborhoods, the places where we work, the places God has called us to occupy. And I think it has two parts. Let me see if I can get this on the screen. The first is this, if I can't find it. I will find it. Jesus said this, and this has captured me. I hope it captures you today. This is the intent of what the church is all about. John 20:21, Jesus says, as the Father has sent me, so am I sending you. His intent is that the church is to live sent. It's to be missional. It's not to play it safe. It's not to draw everybody together in a group and protect ourselves from the influence of the world. His intent is that you're going to live sin. And that implies you're going to go somewhere. You're going to be with people. The church is meant to be a missional, sending agency. And I think somewhere along the line, we've morphed what Jesus said the church was to look like into something else. And I'm not one of those guys that goes all the way over and says, everything we're doing is wrong. No. Let's build on the good things we're doing. We're doing a lot of great things. But Jesus has called us to be a missional sending agency, to live sent for the next, as long as I'm a district superintendent. It's the same message. Every year you're going to say, isn't that a rehash? We're going to say it a new way. But that's our mission. Make disciples that make disciples, which you cannot do unless you're in the community where you live, unless you're in your workplace, unless you are making disciples as you were going about the life you're supposed to be living. Not one more thing, but the thing as you're doing what you otherwise do. That's it. That's it. In Acts chapter 1:8, don't you love Acts? Like, this is the church in motion. Like if you say, I wish I'd have been there when Jesus was there. I wish I'd have been there when the early church was there. You can. It's right here. And here's the commander's intent for the church. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses. Connected to receiving the promised Holy Spirit, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead in you. Connected to that is a command. It's a responsibility. It's a joy that you get to be involved in the work of God, and that is to go be witnesses to the rest of the world. Disciple makers in the world. You see, the church is to be spirit-filled witnesses in the world, empowered by the Holy Spirit. There are two things that really have struck me. That if we're going to change Northwestern Ohio, and I believe that's the mission God's given us. He's placed us here. It isn't to pull the ramparts, close the gates, and say, well, it's an election coming up, and the end of the world is near. It's not, just so you know. No matter which, I hope you're not listening to all the stations that declare that the end of the world is over. It is not. This is our greatest moment. But I love, and I'm probably saying it wrong, Emil Brunner said, the church exists by mission as fire exists by burning. Sometimes we think mission is just one more thing that the church does. And I get it. You can read Acts chapter 2, and you read and you think, wow, they were devoted to the apostles' teaching, and to the fellowship, and the prayer, and the breaking of bread. And you could say, well, that's part of what the community does, yes. But as we're equipped, as we're inspired, as we're supported with each other, guess what we do? We go out into the world and we live missionally all the other times we're there. The church exists by mission, think about that, as fire exists by burning. I would say that without mission, the church dies. The local church, the bigger church, and mission is baked into the very fabric of everything we read about church. I believe that God created the church, the ecclesia, which is an assembly, right? It was in the Greek, it was the ecclesia, the ecclesia, however you want to say it, which is an assembly called out from the world in a spiritual sense, to be sent back into the world as salt and light and to live as a demonstration people of God's goodness to the other nations, to the lost people who don't yet know Jesus. That's my definition of church. That's what Jesus created it to be. That was his intent, that we do that. And you know what the most wonderful thing is? We get to share who Jesus is, not just with our words, but we get to live among people as a demonstration of what his goodness is. How he has blessed us and empowered us, and how he has changed us and transformed us. We get to be a demonstration of how good God is. So when the people say there is no God, wait a minute, there's something unusual here. There's something different over here. Like I'm seeing a demonstration of something that's not of this world. It must be God. That's what God has called us to do. And so we're transforming all of us into a network of change agents, of missional sending agencies all over northwestern Ohio and beyond. The church is an equipping sending agency, but you have to lead the way personally. This will probably rankle a few. I read some research, and the 10 predictive factors for the top 10% churches in any movement, not just Nazarene movement. This is by Rick Richardson. One of the key predictive factors that this was a church that was really going to make disciples and plant churches that are going to plant churches. Like make an impact in the area that they're in, be missional, was that the leader personally shared their faith and made disciples. They didn't delegate that to someone else. Now here's the important point. I've always struggled with this as a lead pastor. Your plate, do you ever see those waiters and they got like 50 plates up here and they're doing this thing? That's how I felt as a pastor. Anybody else? Like, which one's going to fall today? I mean, as a DS, honestly, it feels like there's 3 of those. And there's always stuff falling. So anyway, it's just what you get used to. Oh. You never really get used to the sound of dishes hitting the floor, do you? And if you really want to accomplish something, you never get used to the plates hitting the floor as a DS or as a pastor either. I know you. That's why you don't set that thing down. You're carrying it all over because it's heavy. And so, Andy, you're telling me one more thing on top of everything else. That's the icing on the cake. I'm out. I love the phrase. This freed me up. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Your job is not to disciple the entire church. Your job is to equip the saints to disciple the church. Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Go make disciples. As you're going, make disciples. And if I'm, as your district superintendent, my commitment to you is if you ever catch me not discipling at least one person, take me out. Because that is the very heart of who I am. It should be the very heart of every believer in Jesus. But I can't disciple everyone. I've tried that approach, by the way. First, I'm not good enough. Secondly, there's not enough hours in the day. And sometimes in our hubris, our arrogance, we think maybe we can do more than we can do. But God has called you to be an example first. Didn't it say that somewhere in the ordination thing? Like an example is a flock. Like we have to go first. And if you aren't making a disciple, not a million, one, that you're personally building in one by one, you're not setting the tone. And we will never be missional as a district or as local ecclesias. We just won't. Because it does rise and fall in leadership. But not by your command, but by your example. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. And then call your church to do the same thing. Because as you are going, You're to make disciples. And Jesus gave us a scoreboard, by the way. Whoops, I keep going back and forth. Love this story. You'll see it out on Facebook. Pastor Steve Spoon is leading the Celebrate Recovery. And this is a young man who said yes to Jesus and was baptized and being discipled. That's what happens. Real transformation. Real transformation in people's lives. So I've come to this conviction. If there aren't people regularly coming to Jesus, if there aren't baptism celebrations, if the community where you are in doesn't know that the church exists and you aren't attractive, I question if you're leading a church by the definition of the intent that Jesus gave us. And so my challenge to you is it starts with you. Who's your one? Who is your one? And then, when you're discipling someone, you'll have that spiritual authority in you. You'll have that mojo. I don't know what you call it. You'll have that juice that says, yeah, I want to do this with the whole world. That's just how it works. You know, one of the things I discovered is pastoring, when I was not discipling, but I was only running the machinery of church, this thing had 1,000 pounds in it. And I walked around like this. But when I was discipling someone, it made the machinery of church okay. And some of you are living in the machinery and not in the calling to be an example to the flock, of being missional, of reaching out to your neighbors and friends. What if the church lived sent and you led the way? Not adding one more thing to your plate, but as you were going, investing in your neighborhood or in your workplace, or I've started going to the same coffee shop. And actually, I like coffee and I like their coffee. So it was an easy decision to make because I didn't have one more minute to add to my day. But I do have, God has given me many, many divine appointments in that place. And there was one day I was driving away, and I knew I was supposed to talk to somebody, but I was busy. I had to write district advance message. I got stuff to do. And the Holy Spirit was so strong on me, I had to turn around and go back and talk. And there was a divine moment where I got to share some truth about God and maybe break something there. Someone I see. The mission God has given us is to make disciples and make disciples. And I believe as we make disciples, we send them out to the world. We live sent. As the Father has sent me, so am I sending you. So my challenge today is, how can you live sent? Who is your one? Can you imagine if every church, think with me for a minute, if every one of you led the way by example, and you got to tell that story, because that's how this thing happens. You tell the stories. You got to have a story to tell. That's what inspires me. And when you tell the story, then your church begins to catch the vision. And you challenge them, who's your one. If every church in this district, every leader, led one person to Christ in a year by just befriending one person, discipling one person, and every person in your church caught the vision and did the same thing, this place would explode, and we'd reach northwestern Ohio. We tried all the other approaches, but we didn't listen to the commander's heart. And so we have a chance to fix that, and in the meantime, as we fix that, we're going to rediscover some joy in ministry we didn't have. Because it's in making disciples that the real joy of my heart is. And if I had to stop doing everything else as a pastor, I'd go back to this challenge right here that Jesus gives us. It's more than a challenge. It's a command. It's a responsibility. It's who you are as followers of Jesus. As I've been sent, so his Father sent me, so I'm sending you. That's his heart. That you can't not be a follower of Jesus, a disciple, and not be a disciple maker. And that might be strong. I don't think it is. I think we just need to hear it that clearly and say that's number one on the job description, the mission description of anybody in our church, Anybody on staff? Anybody that's a key leader? That's the mission description. So as we do that, there are going to be opportunities to build relationships with people in our communities. You're going to hear some of those stories today. Today is a day of stories. And I wish I could pull all you up here. I really do. And over time, I hope to do that, because what we're going to do is curate 6 stories today about people, churches, leaders, pastors who are like stepping out and they don't even know what they're doing. They told me that, so I can say that. None of us know what we're doing, if we're honest. But they're willing to step out into the wild blue yonder, into the unknown, put their foot in the water and take a risk. Take a missional risk. And God always rewards that. And so I'm going to have these 6 share their stories. They're my heroes. People that take those kind of risks, live that way missionally, are my heroes. Because they're doing it. We don't know how it's all even going to come out. But some of it's coming out really good already. And these stories are meant to inspire you. They're meant to equip you, because you're going to learn some things in these stories. And they're meant to model for you ways that you can go back and maybe into your own community. And it'll be a catalyst for you to become missional, to start taking risks, to start making disciples, to start living sent as the church and saying, you know what, we're not here to, the world's, no, we're to boldly go into the world with wisdom and rub shoulders with people and be a demonstration of how good God is. And the darker the world gets, the more we shine as the light of the world. The more we taste good as salt. Like this is a time for seasoning, don't you think? Take the lid off. Just pour yourself out. I think that's biblical somewhere. Let me end with this story. There was a lady named Judy, and she lived like just a block from a Nazarene church, and she had never gone to church except for weddings and funerals. And there was this church, there was a guy in the church, he said, Pastor, we go to all these other places, foreign countries, but we've never done like a mission project in our neighborhood. Could we do that? And the pastor thought for a minute and decided that was a good idea. So let's do that. Let's try it. And so they did that, and they did a kind of a blessing our community kind of thing. So they went, door to door and figured out where the needs were. And there was this lady named Judy, and so just a block from the church, and they began to clean her gutters and take care of her. And, and they built relationship. It wasn't about doing the job. It was about building relationship while they demonstrated God's goodness and care. And as they were doing that, they discovered how lonely she was and that she had never been in church other than the wedding or the funeral. And so they began to pray with her because there were some needs, and they asked if they could pray, and they prayed with her, and they could tell she was touched, so they invited her to church and said, hey, come sit with us, and we'll do dinner. By the way, if you invite somebody to church, always tell them to come sit with you. Like it's about the relationship. It's about the relationship. And so come sit with us. And we'll take you to lunch afterward. Come. And so she came. So food works for me. I'm just telling you. I don't know if that was her motivation. I think it was relationship. So she came to the church. Something happened that day, and she became a regular. After a period of time, because she was so connected with these people, she joined a life group. And then she got ill. She went to the hospital. It wasn't looking good. And they came, these people came, and they were with her, and they prayed with her, and she said yes to Jesus. She had a relationship with Jesus. And in that moment, in that same moment, the pastor was there also. She asked if she could be baptized. And so the nurses ran and got some water, and they baptized her right then and there. That's the church living sent. And it struck me, maybe it strikes you. This is fascinating. Judy was not far from God. God was not far from Judy. She was actually looking. She just didn't know what for. Judy wasn't far from the church, only a block away. The only real problem was the church was far away from Judy. And you and I get to change that, because as leaders, we set the tone. We can't blame anyone else. God has put you in that place. He's ordained you for this moment in time, yes, to be a pastor, but also to be a leader, to use your influence, to set an example, and to move the mission of the church to be sent. Both sent individually into the places where we live, to occupy the territories where we are, but also to then maybe send whole groups out to claim new territory that no one's there. Can I just tell you my dream? I believe it's God-given. I don't think this is Andy. Is that there would be a church within 10 minutes of everyone in this northwestern Ohio area. It'd take about 100. We're roughly 50-ish, 55-ish. Depends how you count. And I can't on my own do it. So I'm going to do for one what I wish I could do for everyone. And Jeff and I have talked. We're talking a lot these days. We all want to move to a city and start a church. That's what we want to do. We want to go disciple one and every. I don't get to do that. So I just share this message. I'm going to be an example to you. If I'm ever not discipling someone, call me out. And I'm going to challenge you to be that for your congregation, to be an example one-on-one as you're going, and then challenge every one of them. You're not a disciple unless you're a disciple maker. I know it's a hard language, so you can code it any way you want. If you want to put a little soft sugar on the outside, I probably wouldn't do that. Because the reality is your people want to be challenged. They know what we're doing isn't the plan. And they want to know the story. And wouldn't it be exciting if we could actually change the spiritual temperature in northwestern Ohio? That the people here could know Jesus. And that the hope that they've been longing for would finally be named. His name is Jesus. That's what the missional church is all about. So the stories today are all going to be about ways you can live missionally. But it all comes back. If you don't set the tone, I don't know that it happens. So the real question, the real challenge to you is to lead the way. And then to lead your church to be a sending church, to be a missional church. I've asked Jeff to come, and Jeff's going to share, and then we're going to start the stories. Jeff's going to share about how some of this can happen. So let me cue you up, Jeff, and hit it.
I don't feel nearly as bad now. Took 3 of us. All right, hey, listen, so I wanted to just take a few moments here today and talk to you a little bit about how we got to where we are currently. Because we're talking about the mission of God, and for some of us, it feels fresh and new. And I exist at sort of the intersection of missiology and missional theologian, which means that I get paid to spend a lot of time thinking about the church's posture to the world. And I live in one of those professions that I just hope one day the church will put me out of business. Like, we'll have reclaimed the mission of God, we'll reclaim the vision of what God has created the church to do, and I won't need to read any more and write any more books about this kind of stuff. Like, that's my hope. But for right now, we have to explore a little bit about how we got here and the paradigms that you and I are living in that has led us to this moment where we have to explore the nature of mission in this world. And I use this language of paradigms, and I think paradigms is important because paradigms are the frameworks by which we generally understand the world around us and our place in it. All of us have paradigms. We see the world a certain way. And when you live and participate in the church, in many ways, we operate under a set of paradigms, and our ministries flow out of those paradigms. So what I would like to do for you today is I want to explore some of the assumptions and expectations that maybe some of us have held about ministry based upon our paradigm, and then what it looks like for us to make a shift and maybe embrace a different paradigm. When we look at the ancient church, the church of the first 300 years, it would have understood itself as a movement, not an institution. It was a growing community of faith, always living on the edges, very much on the periphery of the community, always on the margins, and it lacked any sort of institutional validation from the politics around it at that time. It was living always sort of in danger, and it was it was living out this expression. And when you read the early letters of the early church fathers, you come to realize how much of the church was built upon those who lacked the theological acumen and maybe even the professional expertise. They were just commoners, regular people, oftentimes disregarded by the community that they were a part of, but they became a community, and there was something that was so beautifully attractive about the community that they were a part of that people wanted to join and be a part of this thing called the way, or this thing called Jesus following. And so we have this movemental, explosive community. I mean, secular historians are amazed about how quickly this marginalized community grows in this Roman world. I mean, it's remarkable to see the extent of our growth. Then something happens. And what started as a movement becomes an institution. And it ushers into us a paradigm of ministry that many of us have been trained and taught in without even realizing perhaps that this was the paradigm that we were existing in. The paradigm I want to introduce you to, I'm not going to read that right now. Take time here. The paradigm that I want to introduce you is what I call the centripetal paradigm. Centripetal force is the force exerted on an object when it spins around and around that pulls it in. And starting around 400 AD-ish and a little bit beyond, the church, this once marginal community, is thrust into the center of the empire. It begins this movement that ushers in what will later become called Christendom. Right? And it's Christendom in the West. And really what we come to understand during this time is that the church holds a church, faith, religion, they're all sort of synonymous, holds a central place in culture, in politics, in life, in communities, and families, and everything sort of spins it around it. We are established, we're an institution. In fact, even as the wars are spreading across Europe in the 1500s and 1600s. It's political, but it's also religious, right? Because those two are enmeshed together. And when we find this group of people that sort of leaps the pond and ends up in what will become the colonies, the United States, they bring the assumption of Christendom with them to establish these communities that were shaped and formed around an understanding of faith in Christianity. And again, the church kind of stands at the center of our communal life and our social imagination, how we believe the world to work. And then you'll hear, we're created with Christian principles in mind. We are a Christian nation. All of that language is a part of this centripetal mentality, right? Like the church is at the center, it's at the core. And when you live there, you just believe that we're generally in a culture where people are kind of mostly sort of Christian, right? Because they sort of drink from the waters that everybody else drinks from. And there's assumptions that come with that about people's place in church and how the church exists and why and when people go. And if you were a church, you just kind of existed in the community, and people, because they were generally mostly Christian, would eventually find their way to you, right? Because there was this pull. Everything happened internally. Now, that's great, well and dandy. And many of us went to seminaries and schools that were still operating under this paradigm. The challenge is that paradigm began to shift around 1950. We just weren't paying attention. And around 1950, now, I'm going to save you about 300 years of philosophy and history, okay? What we experienced in 1950 didn't begin in 1950. It actually began about 1400. But it just took a little while to catch up. There was no Twitter at that time, all right? So about 1950s, there's this shift. And what happens in this shift is that the church is dislocated. Instead of the church and its grand narrative, its story, standing at the center of our social imagination, the individual is placed in the center, and that individual is in search of their own narrative, their own story that makes sense of their lives, right? So the church, which once held position, we were in our place, like everything came to us, revolved around us, was sucked into us. Now all of a sudden we put the individual there. And now the individual is in search of a story, of which the church is just one of those stories. And we're dislocated. We're put out of the center. We're placed on the margins. And not only are we just one of those stories, we're often not the most preferred story. or we're the story that people are trying to work to discredit. That becomes our place. And so when the church is dislocated, we sort of realize the sands of history are shifting underneath our feet, but we're not really sure what to do with that because we've been trained under a paradigm that assumes that the church should be at the center, that the nation is Christian, and all the expectations and assumptions that go with that. So we do what's really helpful for the church. Instead of peering back into our originating impetus about who we are and what we're called to be, we say, no, right? Like, no, that's not happening. And so we do a few things, really healthy and really helpful. One, we just sort of lament, oh, the world is falling apart. This is terrible. You remember when we were and we just sort of look back, right? Or we deny, this is not happening. No, this is not happening. Not here, not now. Or my favorite is we try to legislate our way out of it. This is the one that always works, right? And has throughout history. I mean, if you follow the history of the church, anytime the church has tried to legislate itself out of this craziness we find ourselves in, and we say, if I just get the right politician in office who will vote the way that I want to do, all will be well again. Right? That works really well, doesn't it? It makes it fun in churches about every 4 years too, doesn't it? It's really good. So we do that. Or what we did as the church, outside of the circle, we said, you know what we need to do? What we've always been doing, just better and cooler. And so right around the 1980s and the early 1990s, we invented what's called the attractional church model. Right? Like we said, listen, the problem is it's not church or our place in society. It's just we're not that cool anymore. So we need to up the cool factor, right? So we said if we build these stadiums, if we have the lights and the cool things and the cool preachers with the cool hair and all of those things, like we will be. And so you see the advent of the church growth attractional model. Now, I'm not one to throw the baby out in the bathwater. We have to understand that many of those churches were born as a result of recognizing that we're at a critical sort of inflection point, and this was the resources that were available to us at the time. And so when you look at the churches like Saddleback and the once famous Willow Creek and all of those stories that we heard for years and years and the conferences we went to for years and years, they were attempting to answer missionally what became an attractional problem. Right? And so you went to the conferences and you changed your stage and you fought the worship wars and you did all of those things and you implemented the playbook. And then guess what? Only a few of us grew. Like we did everything that we were told to do, but only a few of us grew. And that's partly because we were still operating with the same set of paradigm assumptions. And we had to allow our assumptions about the paradigm to shift so that we can embrace a different way of being in the world. So if that's the case, and this is how we've been operating, we've got some options ahead of us. The first option is what I call, you could be the first church of Kodak. And you've got a first church of Kodak in every one of your towns. You know what the first church of Kodak is, right? Y'all remember Kodak? Anybody old enough to remember Kodak? Like it was a thing? Like it was a branded thing, right? Like it was. Did you know they held the market in photography for like 80 years? Like Kodak, when you thought photography, you thought Kodak, right? We don't think Kodak anymore. What do we think when we think photographer? iPhone, right? Okay, so get this. In the 70s, Kodak was approached with this idea that we're moving towards digital photography. And Kodak went, nope, not true. We're not doing that. Like we tell you what photography looks like because we've been telling you what photography looks like for a long time, right? And so they said they actually shut down the conversation about digital photography. They said we're always going to do it this way. It's always going to be this way. Does anybody run into too much Kodak material right now? You know what they did? They confused the expression of their mission with the mission itself. Did y'all hear that? They confused the expression of their mission with the mission itself. Their mission was to take and make photos. They thought the way they'd been doing it was the mission. And they lost track. So your option is you can be a First Church of Kodak, and you can continue to pump energy into the attendance machine, and you can maximize your programming, and you can continually try to hopefully have enough money to hire the rock stars that are specialists that can do all the work in the church, and you can focus all your time and talent and treasure on what's happening in at the church, and you can pressure to nail Sunday morning, you could build your brand, and you can measure success by the certain statistics, and you can develop ministries, and you can constantly push for. Anybody else getting tired? I just got tired saying it. Do you all know that that's the kind of energy that it takes to lead First Church of Kodak? It's exhausting and frustrating, because you can do all of that and still find yourself wondering, are we doing anything? So the last few minutes that I have, I want to introduce you to a different paradigm. We are in a time of disruption, and I think disruption is good for the church. Equilibrium creates comfort. Comfort creates apathy. Apathy creates atrophy. So it's not that we don't have a missional imagination, it's just we've not had to use it very much. Disruption evokes missional imagination. So let me introduce you to a different paradigm. This is what I call the paradigm of centrifugal force. If centripetal is the energy exercised on an object when it spins around and pulls it in, centrifugal force is the energy exercised on an object that flings it out. So here's what I want you to think about when you think centrifugal force. Y'all remember riding your bikes through mud puddles? Y'all remember that? Like you would ride your bike through a mud puddle, and then you would come in the house. And on the front of you, your mom would meet you, and you'd be like, "Hey, Mom." And she'd smile at you, and then you'd walk past her, and she would, like that strip right up your back, right? That she, what did you do? Right? That's centrifugal force. So here's what I'm suggesting to us. Instead of trying to resituate ourselves in the center of society and culture and politics and all of those things, we recognize that maybe, just maybe, that was an iteration of life that Jesus said, okay, I'll work with it, but it wasn't his intention. That maybe instead of reclaiming that place, maybe instead we put the mission and mandate in the center of the life of the church, and that we spin around that mission and mandate, the call of the kingdom of God, and that from that, we as the church are then flung out into the world. And we are flung like mud into the lives of those who are in search of narratives. And that we take up residence. We find ourselves connecting with them. We recognize that it's the church. It's not about having this great branded identity that just draws people in. And there are going to be certain churches that's true for, and they're still making an impact, and I praise God, and they're baptizing a lot of people. But for the most of us, it's going to require us to embrace a different kind of paradigm where we ask the question not about how many people are coming, but how many people are we sending? And where are we sending them to? Are we equipping them and empowering them to live as lifestyle missionaries wherever they live, work, and play? That they would begin to see the general swath of land that they find themselves in every single day as the mission area for which their good news is being shared with all of those around them every single day. Which then shifts how we understand ourselves. The church becomes less about a landing zone and more about a launching pad. Can you imagine launching your people into the work of God every single week? Mission becomes the reason for being. Discipleship becomes the root of our lives in the church. Leadership becomes the fruit. Meaning this, instead of just trying to find people to plug the holes to fulfill your programs, what about investing yourself in people's lives so that they are developed, so that they can fulfill the purpose for which God has called them to, and they start to lead in ways that maybe you hadn't even realized. Discipleship looks less like information and more like apprenticed formation. This is critical. Instead of just giving them new stuff to think about, we actually invite them to do life with us, and that apprenticing then forms them to be faithful Jesus followers. Sunday mornings becomes increasingly important just for a different reason. So to the attractional model, Sunday mornings were important because we got to nail it because this is when the people are coming and they got to be impressed by what we do. Now Sunday mornings becomes this is the place where we form them according to the Christian story. Instead of just trying to give them little snippets of little cool things to talk about, we give them the actual story of Jesus that forms them to be a certain kind of person. Our worship forms them to be a certain kind of people because we realize that what they do throughout the week is far more important than what simply happens in that 1 hour a week. So Sunday mornings becomes different for a different reason. Staff shifts from being specialists, We don't need rock stars. We need people who equip people to do the work. Like if you can't make leaders and you can't make disciples, then you're going to struggle. So we don't need more specialists. We need the metrics change. And I think this is the most freeing thing. All of a sudden we stop evaluating ourselves every Sunday by the 6 families that chose to choose the same Sunday to go on vacation, and we lament that they're on vacation. What is wrong with us? As pastors, we know that feeling. Like, did you all not talk? I can't have you taking vacation on the same Sunday, right? But when the metrics change to how many people are being baptized, how many people have moved from brand new follower of Jesus to now they're committed to a ministry in the community and they're giving themselves away to the community. The metrics change. There's intense clarity with abundant permission. We start to give people permission to go out and play. And we increase simplicity to guard and maximize missional effectiveness. One of the things I love about this is that into this model, you actually start doing less so you can do more. Part of the reason why you feel like you've got a plate full is because you're spinning too many things that don't need to be spun anymore. You know, some things just got to go to create room so that your people can be more missional. So this is the paradigm that we're inviting you to consider, to think about, and to embrace. As you think about what does it mean for us as a church to embrace this of being thrust out, flung out into the community to make a difference in the lives of others. We'll be spending some time throughout this next year talking a little bit more about this from time to time, but I wanted to introduce you this as we make our way forward. I believe is it break time? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to take about 10 minutes. 10-minute break time. There's some snacks over here, coffee over here. If you are a lead pastor and you've yet to receive that beautiful stack of books, I mean, just calling you, if you're a lead pastor, go get one of those. This is Tom Noble's theology. Listen, folks, this is the theology of the Church of the Nazarene right there. And Tom Noble is brilliant, and I can't tell you how expensive that set is. So we're giving that away. If you're a lead pastor and you don't own one, go get one. All right, see you in a few minutes.